On today's episode, the Black Sea Grain Initiative has ended. Ukraine has proposed a temporary maritime route. Meanwhile, Russia has declared a danger zone. Hi, I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano, and you heard me right. Russia has gone full Kenny Loggins Top Gun and has declared a danger zone in and around the Black Sea, particularly vessels sailing to the ports of Ukraine. Okay, this has the potential to go badly very quickly, and most importantly, it has the potential to involve commercial shipping and civilian merchant mariners caught in the crossfire of a war between Ukraine and Russia carrying food. And this is a story that's right up what's going on with shipping's alley, and so we're going to break this down. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. All right, let's jump into this. This is the letter written by the embassy in Ukraine, embassy in London of Ukraine, and forwarded over to the International Maritime Organization, headquartered in London, of the United Nations. This is the shipping arm of the United Nations. And specifically what the Ukrainians are asking or telling the world is that we are sending this notice to the world that we are establishing a temporary maritime route that's going to hug the shore of Romania and Ukraine in their territorial waters to get access to the ports in and around Odessa. And specifically, they're citing the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, Articles 22 and 87. UNCLOS, as it's known, is a treaty signed and ratified by almost every seafaring nation around the world except for one. Hi, that's us, the United States. Yes, we signed it, but we haven't ratified it in the U.S. Senate because the U.S. Senate thinks if we ratify UNCLOS that we give up our national sovereignty and the UN boat police will show up. There's no UN boat police. There's very few rule enforcement on the high seas. And acknowledging UNCLOS is what every other nation on the planet has largely done, and we really should do it. The other element they cite here is the Safety of Life at Sea Convention, the 1974, Chapter 5 Annex, that basically argues that they can establish this route up to their country to move shipping. They want to set up a 3-mile wide corridor with a maximum draft of vessels of 36 feet, about 12 meters, coming through. So what's this all mean, and what's the background on it? Well, Russia has responded to this. Let's be clear. Russia has countered this with this statement. This is a story on Reuters on G-Captain. Russia issues warning to Ukrainian-bound ships. Russia warned that from Thursday, any ships sailing to Ukraine's Black Sea ports would be seen as potentially carrying military cargoes. One of the aspects of the Black Sea Grain Initiative was Russians inspected vessels sailing up to Ukraine prior to departing the Turkish Straits to ensure that they weren't carrying any weapons or munitions. Now, let's be clear. Weapons and munitions are flowing into Ukraine in huge amounts through overland routes of Romania and Poland by road, by rail, and even by aircraft. So they really don't need ships to haul weapons and gear into Ukraine, but that's the argument the Russians are taking. As Kyiv accused Moscow of carrying out hellish overnight strikes that damage grain export infrastructures. So you're seeing a tit for tat right now on the Black Sea between the Ukrainians and the Russians. So you had Ukraine hit the Kerch Strait Bridge. This is the bridge that connects Crimea to mainland Russia. They have already hit it in the past, but the attack that they just accomplished shut down the road access. Now, the rail is still going, so the railway is still open, but the Russian Navy has used some of their amphibious vessels to ferry vessels across the Kerch Strait right now, vehicles across the Kerch Strait. But the bridge is currently closed to motorway traffic. This happened earlier. We've seen an attack on the Kerch Strait Bridge. This is the second attack. At the same time, Russia has launched a series of attacks on Odessa for the past 2 nights, hitting the grain loading facilities in and around the port, along with hitting civilian targets in and around the port. So you're having these attacks by both Russia and Ukraine against each targets. And the fear here is that this escalates. This escalates beyond just attacks on Odessa and the Kerch Strait Bridge to attacks on commercial shipping either heading to Ukraine or out of Russia, which is the danger scenario. So this article right here is wheat prices spike as Russia issues warning to ships. Bloomberg article over in G Captain, wheat futures soared as much as 9%. That's the biggest rise since 2012, excuse me, so over a decade, as Russia threatened ships sailing to Ukraine ports, escalating a conflict over exports from the Black Sea grain region. It goes on here that the Chicago wheat prices, the global benchmark, quickly shot higher, rising by as much as the exchange limit. Paris wheat closed up 8.2%, the biggest rise since February of 2022. Understand, even though we have seen that there's been an excess of grain coming out of Ukraine during this period, there were many stories of grain piling up in silos in Eastern Europe, for example. Any disruption has the potential to cause a cataclysmic kind of butterfly effect down the supply chain. And with the grain now cut off out of Ukraine, the fear here is this escalates. And what's going to stop Ukraine from maybe interdicting Russian wheat and grain coming out of the Black Sea also? And that is causing futures to spike all of a sudden. And again, it's not the price of current wheat, it is the price of futures. Now, this has been made up by other wheat and corn production around the world, but again, we've seen a lot of disruptions being caused by weather, by rivers, by you name it. And so this has the potential to impact global food prices. Going on here, we also see this story. U.S. Navy backs away from Ukraine's proposal to protect grain in NATO waters. So myself and this article by John Conrad, we have talked quite a bit here about the idea of what can be done to ensure the safe movement of ships in and out of Ukraine. The Black Sea Grain Initiative basically established a corridor where ships could sail and come back from, but there was no protection for the vessels. It was basically the good words of Ukraine and Russia to allow those vessels to sail. Now we're in a much different point. And again, we're seeing that this potential can escalate very quickly. And John Conrad goes through a series of these issues right here. He has a quote in here from Cindy McCain, who's the United Nations World Food Program director, about what this shortage could mean. You see the statements here by the Russian defense minister talking about that they'll view any ship sailing to Ukraine as carrying potentially military targets. He's got a section in here highlighting statements by Admirals James Stavridis and James Fogo, talking about NATO providing escorts for these vessels or potentially a reflagging operation to reflag vessels heading up to Ukraine with American or NATO flags to justify the protection to them. There's allegations against the illegal blockading of Ukraine by Russia. Let's not forget the Russians mined the waters in and around Ukraine. Ukraine also mined the waters to ensure that there wasn't an invasion by Russia. And then there's the question of what can be done. Should the U.S. and NATO nations do something? And almost immediately, one of the things you have to tackle with is getting vessels into the Black Sea because of the Turkish Straits and the Montreux Convention of 1936. A lot of people will sit there and say, well, that doesn't work. But John addresses that right here. While Article 19 of the Montreux Convention prevents U.S. warships from entering the Black Sea, that is not the case. The article only prevents ships from belligerent states, in this case Russia and Ukraine, from entering. Turkey has requested that no warships enter, but might willing to negotiate port visits to Romania and Bulgaria if asked. Turkey is the big variable here. If Turkey allows this, if they allow NATO minesweepers or NATO warships up onto the Black Sea, then you could have potentially escorts. So far, the U.S. Navy has not asked, and no government has asked. Now, technically, the U.S. Navy wouldn't ask. It would be the U.S. government to ask. But John notes this. A Navy source tells G Captain that the idea of escorting ships via the territorial waters of NATO nations instead of via international waters in the Black Sea was discussed in the Pentagon this weekend, but rejected on Monday. This rejection was reiterated today by retired Rear Admiral and White House spokesman John Kirby during a press briefing in Washington. This is what he said. You are suggesting that we simply try to conduct a blockade, an effective military blockade in the Black Sea? No, this is not an option that is being actively considered, and we are not pursuing. Now, I'm not sure why he said blockade. I don't think anyone's talking about blockading Russia. The issue here is convoying and whether or not to escort vessels. Now, understand, you don't have to surge Ticonderoga class cruisers and Burke-class destroyers up into the Black Sea. There are other options to do. You can deploy assets along the shore of Romania and Ukraine because the proposed route that they have is close in to shore. This is the chart that was attached to the Ukraine memo to the IMO with the proposed route. And this green route here begins at the large anchorage off the Danube River, right at the border of Romania and Ukraine, and then proceeds within the territorial waters of Ukraine up into the main shipping channel that has been used in the past, out into international waters, and then into the port of Odessa. Snake Island is right here, so you have that area of coverage by Snake Island with potentially anti-aircraft and anti-missile batteries and then shore-based batteries. And again, you don't need warships to do this. You can do this with shore-based assets. You can do this with ride-along crews if necessary. Obviously, naval vessels would be preferred to have them on board here to provide escort for them, but this can be done without it. However, what Russia is now talking about is that any vessels heading into this area are going to be viewed as military targets and therefore subject to attack. And this has the potential to bring in neutral flag vessels. We have already saw that at the beginning of the war where Russia had no compulsion hitting vessels flying the Marshall Island flag, Bangladesh, Turkey, you name it. We've seen a lot of this happen at the very beginning of the war. And now this is talking about escalating even further. Pull up a quick chart here of marine traffic showing you the fact that there are no vessels in up here around the Gulf of Odessa. It has been vacated. Yet right here you do see the large anchorage off the Danube River. These are the vessels waiting to get grain that's coming out of the Danube and being used. But again, almost no. And again, what they would do is hug along the Ukrainian coast here, heading up. But this is Crimea. Sevastopol is right down here. And so you are not far from the Russian main naval base. Now, the Russians have pulled their forces back because of attacks. But the danger that we do have is that if Russia decides to hit vessels sailing to Ukraine, then what about all these vessels sailing out of the Turkish Strait here, heading up to Russia, to the port of Novorossiysk, and up to the Kerch Straits, into the Sea of Azov, and then meeting with vessels at Rostov-on-Don, and then being fed by vessels coming off the Don, the Volga, and out of the Caspian Sea. This has the potential to turn into a shooting gallery if we are not careful. If Ukraine can get some shipping companies to agree to run their vessels. And again, shipping companies will do it in a second. Let me be clear. If there's a profit to be made, they will do it. They don't care about the vessels because one of the provisions that Ukraine noted in their IMO memo is that they have war risk insurance. They will provide the war risk insurance. You have to have normal insurance on a vessel, hull and machinery, and what's called P&I, protection and indemnity for the cargo. But that doesn't cover war risk. If you get hit by a Caliber missile, it doesn't cover that. Ukraine will cover that. Ukraine will cover the loss of any vessel. And so if you are a ship owner, the prospect is you can make a huge profit. You can come out of Ukraine with cargo that could be really worth a great deal. And that if you lose your vessel, you'll be reimbursed to go buy a brand new one. The losers here, as always, are the crews on board who don't get anything out of this deal. And this is the issue. Now, understand what we're losing here by the Black Sea Grain Initiative ending. This is the UN website, and all the data you need is right here. Have the link in the show notes. 32.9 million metric tons of cargo has been shipped out, 725,000 tons of that into the World Food Program. Yes, it's a fraction of the total amount, but that's 725,000 pounds of tons of cargo that it goes into UN coffers to feed people who can't afford it. Not to mention a large part of that 32 million also gets processed into food and sold worldwide. And you can see corn is the major commodity. Wheat is the other one. This actually has a great series of tables if you want to go through it, and you can go through it and take a look at it. I prefer a set of tables done by a friend of mine on Twitter at Exit266. She does a great job, has this very easy to read data sheets that you can go through. 1,004 ships have been involved in this trade. 22 of them are still out delivering, so 982 cargoes have been delivered. The vast majority of it is corn coming out. The biggest receiver of it is China, and so the fact that China receives about 7.8 million tons of this cargo, and now it's going to be cut off from it, that's going to be a factor here. But Spain, Netherlands, Turkey, Italy, all are big receivers of this cargo that is processed and sold around the world. Now, you're going to sit there, and I know it's going to happen because this happens every time I bring up doing anything in the Black Sea, is the Navy's going to come back screaming at me saying that we don't need to put our ships into harm's way and risk things, and we shouldn't do it. Yet, I can't help but note that we do it all the time. I mean, this story over in USNI News just the other day that the U.S. is sending a destroyer, F-35s, F-16s, to protect merchant ships in the Middle East. Let's be clear. Iran has grabbed 2 tankers. We have basically appropriated 1 tanker, and that's why that happened. And then there was another tanker that was attacked. This is a gnat on the back of a water buffalo in terms of interdiction of trade and commerce in world oil. The amount of ships that are going in and out of the Persian Gulfs are hundreds every day. And this is a small little element. Not saying it's not unimportant. It is important. But these cargoes are insured. And let's be clear, the U.S. hasn't done quite a lot to do this. Yes, everyone's going to go back to, hey, wait a minute, Sal, in the 1980s, we protected tankers during the tanker war. We did in the late 1980s. But for the first 7 years of that conflict, we didn't do anything. When Iran and Iraq was at war with each other, they shot at tankers all the time. We only became involved when Kuwaiti offered to reflag their tankers, not to the U.S., but to the Soviet Union. And then we intervened and said, no, we'll do it. We reflagged the tankers to U.S. flag and started escorting them out, and then got into the shooting war with Iran in the Persian Gulf. Even during the height of Somalia and piracy, we only directly intervened when American ships were grabbed. I mean, when you grab Tom Hanks, you have to intervene. I mean, it's Tom Hanks. He's a national treasure. You've got to go save him. But if you weren't Tom Hanks, more importantly, if you were flying a flag not of the United States, then the pirates would grab you, drag your ship off the coast of Somalia, and hold you prisoner until the shipping lines paid a ransom. We never went in to go free them. We never rooted out the pirate nest ashore. We never did that. And that's an important one. And how often do you see these stories where the U.S. will do freedom of navigation operations near Chinese land that we say is not Chinese land, in the South China Sea, in the Taiwan Strait, and yet here we're talking about the Black Sea, which is international waters, except when you're 12 miles out from land, and Russia is announcing the creation of a danger zone, and they're going to have the right to shut down trade coming out of Ukraine while food, fuel, and fertilizer flow out of their ports. This is an issue that can very quickly escalate. I am not advocating one direction or another, but there needs to be a conversation about this. And we need to talk about this because if it escalates, if the Russians start attacking commercial ships heading to Ukraine, Ukraine will take it upon themselves to start attacking Russian ships coming out of Russian ports. And then the Black Sea becomes a shooting gallery. And that is not good for anyone worldwide. You may not think the Black Sea impacts you, but it does. And the concept that a little cul-de-sac off the Mediterranean has no importance in world shipping is very clear based on what we've seen with global supply chains throughout this period. A lot of news going on, and I wanted to cover it. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, give it a thumbs up, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You can hit the super thanks button down below or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly or yearly subscriber. Until our next video, Sal signing off.